The Four Crosses Inn has seen thousands of travellers coming and going over the centuries, but it seems that some drinkers just don't want to leave. Come and sit by me as we get into the history of this almost 400-year-old pub, as well as the stories that have led to its reputation of being a super haunted location. Be careful if you need a wee there too. Hey friend, how are you doing? Doing good? Drinking your water? If you're new around here, hello, welcome. My name is Claire and I am a lover of all things morbid, mysterious, and macabre. Just all those weird things, I just love them. I love watching paranormal investigations, but I adore hearing about the history and people's personal experiences so much more. So that is what we are doing here. Every week we sit down and swap ghost stories like a good old sleepover, so if that is your scene, I would highly recommend subscribing so that you never miss one of our chats. So come sit by me, grab your water, and we will get into it. Sources for this week. Okay, so the alarm bells were ringing as, other than a few local papers and those paranormal database websites, there wasn't really a huge amount out there. There was a small section in Haunted Staffordshire by Philip Solomon, but it was so small that I completely forgot to bring the book in before I started filming, so yeah. And just as a side note, if you are interested in these stories and you can't stand to sit through my yammering on, first of all, I don't blame you. But also, there is a great website called theghostbook.co.uk that is pretty much bang on with their information. Most of the stories and the information that they've got tends to be quite accurate when I go and cross-reference it. So yeah, even while I was gathering up the sources, I was starting to have doubts about this place creeping in. But I knew that I really wanted to get to the bottom of this story anyway and do all of the research I could on it, as I grew up relatively local to the area. So much so that actually it was because when I was younger I was part of a youth motorcycle display team. Shout out to Piston Rings, may you rest in peace. But basically when me and my brother were in this team, it would consist of most weekends through the summer going to steam shows and classic car events and family country shows. I think they'd be the UK version of county fairs that Americans have maybe. But anyway, a lot of these shows that the team would perform at would be over that sort of Staffordshire, Shropshire kind of way. So Weston Park, Shugborough Hall, places like that. And so we would pass the Four Crosses Inn quite a lot, and it always stuck out in my mind because, just look at it, it is a really unique, striking building. And so when I came across that it was apparently haunted, you knew I was gonna have to cover it. And so that is exactly what we're gonna do, and our story takes us over to Cannock in Staffordshire. And Cannock itself is known for some really weird goings on thanks to the Cannock Chase Forest, which honestly, the stories coming out of that place are so wild that I'm dedicating a whole episode to it. But today we're just talking about one building in particular, the Four Crosses Inn. So the building that first sat on the site of where the Four Crosses is now, that started life in 1636 as a farmhouse, as that was what the land would have mostly been used for. So the oldest part of the building itself dates back to 1636, but even back then they were into recycling because the timbers that the farmhouse was made out of were actually old shipping timbers, which even at that point, they were hundreds of years old. I think they dated some of them, not that long ago, and they found that they were actually 1,000 years old, these old shipping timbers, which is nuts. But the thing was, it was in such a strategic location as it sat on a crossroads, which at the time in the 17th century would have been super busy. These were the important trade routes between the various towns and villages in the area. So you'd get a lot of people coming and going in that space. You know what they all need? Less coin in their purses. And maybe a beverage and some food. So over time, the farmhouse was gradually transitioned into a pub, which was absolutely the right move. Because even as we start moving on in history and the trade routes change and whatnot, one of the roads that runs past the building will remain super important because the inn sits on the A5, which is actually based on a Roman road that was eventually named by the Anglo-Saxons as Watling Street. And it ran all the way from London to Holyhead in North Wales, which from there you can get across to Ireland. But obviously, way back in the day when you don't have these newfangled vehicular contraptions with their internal combustion engines, it would take a long time to travel along this road. So there was still this need for inns so that these people could stop off, grab food, rest their horses for the night before carrying on the next day. They needed motorway services. And the Four Crosses, like, they were doing it right, you know? It used to be a completely self-contained unit way back in the day. It would actually brew its own beer, so, like, none of that brewery, like, delivering the beer kind of thing. You got your buzz straight from the source. Like, no wonder it was popular. And eventually, they did need to expand again. And so you can see it's been added to over the years with, like, the black and white timber frame part dates back to the 1600s. And that was the original bit, whereas the more recent, like it was still like extended with the red brick in like 1700s, so not super recent. But it's still cool to see like the evolution of the place, you know? And there've even been rumours of like secret tunnels and passageways being built into the structure too. As in 1950, they actually found a hidden oak door that had been plastered up behind a wall. And this door was carved with the date 1638. What I want to know is like, was the door like openable? Like did the door like actually lead into a tunnel? Or had someone just like left it leaning up against the wall and the plaster had come along and just like plastered the wall, like door and all, being the very definition of moving that door is not my job? Like, I don't know. But by the end of its expansions over the years, it actually had 10 bedrooms that travellers could stop in overnight. But if you were a prisoner being transported, don't worry, they had space for you too. Not actual comfortable bedroom space though, obviously. You'd just be holed up in the attic, ready to be transported onwards to your next destination. There were other notable visitors to the pub though during this time. Apparently, the infamous highwayman Dick Turpin frequented the Four Crosses, but then again, like, of course he did. I'm pretty sure that any pub that's older than a couple hundred years claims that Dick Turpin has visited them at least once. Maybe one day I'll have to do an episode on him. I'll probably end up doing this like feature-length film on all of the places that he's supposed to haunt. He's got to be one of the busiest ghosts out there. Like his schedule is packed full. So anyway, the Four Crosses really came into its own in the 1800s. People were moving about like more than ever. The Four Crosses was doing a roaring trade, especially amongst those travellers going from London to Ireland. They even had a stock of what was called fresh horses, so horses that were fit and ready that you could just like swap out for your tired ones so that you could use it for like the next leg of your journey if you needed to. And I really can't overstate like how important this route is, like sitting on the A5. Obviously it wasn't the A5 back then, but like that road, it was very important. In the 1800s, basically the Four Crosses acted like your local post office depot because it would also stable post horses, which were used to carry your letters and things. And I mean, when you've got visitors coming and going from the Four Crosses, you got travellers, drinkers, even the postman, stuff is going to get left behind at some point. There was a story that was told down the generations that an old coachman's uniform had been found stuffed up in a chimney in the inn, consisting of a velvet top and a pair of buckskin trousers. Bit of intrigue there, right? What on earth is this coachman's uniform doing being stuffed into a chimney? Like, surely that's a little bit suspicious. There's got to be a juicy story there. Actually, it's just that the story got exaggerated. A coachman's uniform was found, but it was actually found neatly tucked away in a trunk in the attic. And we know that because the records held at the County Museum in Shugborough say so. The uniform is apparently from the 1820s and it could have potentially belonged to someone working on the mail coaches running in like the Birmingham area at that time. So no scandalous story, just a postman left his uniform behind. Eventually, the road that the Four Crosses sits on started to decline in popularity with the introduction of like railways that meant pretty much the end of needing to stable fresh horses. Like people just weren't using the route for that massive journey anymore. And then in 1861, the landlord even decided that it was probably time to jack in the post horses too. But the pub continued on even after its kind of heyday in the early 1800s was over. And it was one of those like proper old boozer places, like you know the ones I'm talking about, which just seems to add to the place's charm. But it wasn't all cheery. There were apparently a few recorded deaths. Like it says online that they're recorded deaths, but I couldn't find like concrete proof of them. Like I even went so far as to contact like local newspapers and still couldn't get any actual proof. So I'm just prefacing that before I tell you like apparently what went on. There were two stories that were commonly talked about, and the first one is that sometime in the 1800s a family was staying at the Four Crosses. The family had their baby with them, and somehow, I'm really hoping that alcohol wasn't involved, although I'm gonna guess it probably was. The baby fell off the table that it had been put down on, and unfortunately the baby died. Another absolutely tragic story comes from the 1980s. So back then, the front door of the pub used to open like straight out onto the main road, like onto the A5. And it's a busy road, like you've got cars going up and down, big lorries like whizzing past, like you've got to be really careful. Allegedly, there was a kid that ran straight out the front door, right onto the road. He was hit by a car and killed. There were some stories that said that this hadn't been the first time that this had happened, and that it had happened like multiple times throughout the years. And I mean, it makes sense, doesn't it? Like, it's sad, but it makes sense. When the place was first built, like, it wouldn't have mattered that the front door led straight out onto the road. The worst you were going to get was probably an ox would stand on your foot or something. But then you add in the alcohol and the effect that can possibly have on your balance and control as you're leaving said drinking establishment. Yeah, not great. After that tragic incident in the 80s, the front entrance was bricked up and the main door was moved to the back. I mean, it's for the best, really, isn't it? Alongside these awful incidents with kids, there have apparently been a bunch of suicides over the years, all just adding to the energy of the place. But even its centuries of history wasn't enough to save it from the inevitable, as in 2019, it closed for good. I'm gonna take a guess and say that it probably had something to do with like less and less traffic using that stretch of the A5. Like the M6 toll runs along that bit, I think. So you've got less drivers, and then as well as that, you've also got the drink driving laws. A bit like the story of the Busby Stoop Inn that we spoke about. Like the Four Crosses is kind of like just on a road. It's not in this built up residential area or anything where you can like stumble on home after a drink or 10. At that point, you'd have to make like a specific drive out there, which isn't conducive to an optimal drinking environment now, is it? But now the place is hired out, what looks like extremely regularly by paranormal groups, all trying to capture evidence of these stories that have been passed down through the centuries. And there have been quite a few stories. These stories even earned the Four Crosses a spot on the TV programme Great British Ghosts, hosted by Michaela Strachan. Does anyone else remember The Really Wild Show? I think she presented that when I was a kid, along with Steve Backshall and Nick Baker. Wow, that was a blast from my past. Those memories were just dragged up from the depths. So in the pub, there seems to be ghost stories in almost every part of the building, starting as soon as you walk in the door. Apparently, glasses have been witnessed flying off the bar and smashing to the ground when there's no one around. This is sometimes blamed on an entity known as Charlie, who apparently haunted the bar in life too, as a drunk in the 19th century. Staff members used to report that he liked causing mischief, so smashing glasses sounds right up his alley. But the poltergeist activity doesn't end there. Allegedly, the fire has been started up in the fireplace and was just there, burning away happily, without a single human in the room. No one had lit the fire at all. Figures have also been seen around the building, ranging seemingly from everything between solid figures that are just as there as you and me, right through to just shadowy, misty figures moving about. In one encounter that was spoken about on Great British Ghosts, there was a staff member who came face to face with the solid apparition of a girl in one of the bar areas. They looked at each other, seemingly for a moment, as you know, like the brain kind of like catches up with what you're seeing in front of you. This ghostly girl in front of the staff member was reported to be barefoot and her clothes were all like scruffy and torn up. But this girl was looking directly back at the staff member until the entity turned away and just walked through the wall. After that, the staff member quit her job. Just noped out of the entire situation, like, you are not paying me enough for this. Which, I mean, yeah, that's fair enough. The toilets seem to be a real hotspot for some reason. In the ladies' toilets, there have been some really weird things reported. One morning, as the landlady was opening up, she went into the loos and saw that there was 2 carnations on top of the toilet seat. Like, okay, yeah, that's a bit weird, but there were carnations on the windowsill. It might have just been a particularly artistic drunk last night, maybe. Whatever, so she just carried on, opening up, and went to go out into the bar area. Only there was a candelabra that had been moved from the bar area right into the doorway of the women's toilets. Like, this was a heavy candelabra. There was no conceivable way that she wouldn't have noticed it when she first went into the toilets. And there was no one else around there that could have been, like, just playing a joke on her. Like, nothing. So naturally, she was quite freaked out after that. Other women who've used the loos have reported hearing children crying and muttering away to each other in there. Almost like if you just like poke your head around the corner out of the cubicle, you'd see some like stray kids just hanging out in the loos. But of course, there is no one there. The men don't get to pee in peace either though. Apparently, the men's toilets are haunted by a Roundhead soldier who would have been like a parliamentarian soldier who would have fought for Oliver Cromwell during the English Civil War. Which is a bit unusual. Like, I don't think there are any known battles in the immediate area, but it is entirely possible that parliamentarian soldiers would have passed through Cannock at some point. So maybe one had like a fatal accident along the way and decided that the local watering hole would be the best place to spend eternity. Can't say I blame him, to be honest. There's also a story of a shadowy cloaked figure that will stand in the car park and look longingly at the building on rainy nights, which sounds very melodramatic. Another figure, or maybe it is the same one, has also apparently been seen knocking on the door to the inn. Maybe just missed last call by minutes. There's also apparently a middle-aged woman who haunts the Four Crosses, as well as a little boy called Scotty. And then there are the black-eyed children. I'm not going to get into these delightful entities as, number one, they absolutely terrify me. And number two, there's a lot more to say about them when we start talking about Cannock Chase. Like, we will get all the way into whether they are the souls of tormented children, aliens, or something a little bit more elemental. But apparently, black-eyed children have been spotted in the Four Crosses, even peering into the windows. And I think I've already said this once or twice on a video, but excuse me, absolutely not. Like, seriously though, like, it is pitch black outside and you look out the window and you can see the pale little face of something staring into the room. No! Elsewhere in the pub, unexplained footsteps can be heard that don't sound like the old timbers settling. Disembodied voices are also heard, and some people report being touched by unseen hands. Cold drafts will come out of nowhere, and dogs will react to things in the room when there's absolutely nothing there, or nothing that you can see anyway. And don't forget, this wasn't in, you could stay the night if you like. But it seems that you might have some uninvited guests stay in the bedroom with you. When some guys from the brewery were staying at the inn, they were handed the keys to bedroom 3. They went up the stairs to go dump their stuff in the room, and they knocked on the door before they went to open it. Before they could open the door, they heard a woman shout from inside, oh, just a minute. It's like, oh, okay, oops, sorry, maybe the landlord have given us the wrong key or just told us the wrong room or something, no big. So they went back down the stairs to tell the landlord, I think there's someone in there. But the landlord was like, nah mate, it is definitely bedroom 3. There is no one in that room. And I know that for a fact because no one is checked in at all right now. So they all went back up the stairs and the landlord was right. There was no one in bedroom 3. But those two guys were adamant they had heard a woman in that room, clear as day, call out, just as someone would if they'd heard a knock on their bedroom door and weren't quite ready or decent or something. And so while the Four Crosses isn't as popular as, say, the Ancient Ram Inn, or have the paranormal stories to rival, the Black Monk of Pontefract, there are still plenty of rumours of strange goings-on that keep paranormal investigators coming back to this old inn, even to this day. But please, let me know what you think. Did you ever visit the pub when it was a pub? Or have you gone and done an investigation there? Please let me know anything that you experienced or didn't experience there. I've seen some great investigations on the place, like the Ouija brothers have been there and Ghosts on Trent as well, who both seem to capture some things going on. And so with this one, I think it is entirely possible that it is haunted. It's an old building and that's kind of a precursor to being a haunted location with all of those years of living and dying within those walls. I think it's just more of that logical, I guess skeptical part of me where the stories are a bit wishy-washy and some stories about the ghosts seem just wildly exaggerated. It kind of makes me think twice about saying with 100% certainty that yes, this place is definitely haunted. But I do think it is entirely possible. And if you know of any of the actual records from this place, particularly on the accident in the 80s or anything like that, please do let me know below. But that is all from me today. I cannot wait to chat with you more next week. If you enjoyed this story, I would be forever grateful if you'd hit that like button. It really does help me out. And if you fancy coming back for another story sometime, then maybe you want to subscribe too. But until next time, sleep safe. But obviously, way back in the day when you didn't have these newfangled vehicular newfangled vehicular